Welcome to Reformed Thinking. For this deep dive, we're taking a careful look at a source that has comforted, well, countless generations. Charles Spurgeon's powerful exposition of Psalm 48, which he titled, "The Eternal Security of Zion."
And our mission today is pretty laser-focused. We're going to be working through excerpts from his colossal work, The Treasury of David, to pull out some key insights.
Right.
We're looking at three interlocking ideas: the sheer greatness of the Lord, the absolute security of his dwelling place, which is Zion, and we understand that as the church, and maybe most dramatically, the sudden, almost self-defeating opposition that always seems to rise against it.
And what's great is that we have a structure already laid out for us by the psalmist. It's a perfect blueprint, really, for understanding divine protection.
Right.
But before we jump in, let's quickly set the stage. The source notes that this psalm is titled, "A Song and Psalm for the Sons of Korah." That title alone, blending a song and a psalm, that tells us something right away about the emotional posture that's required from the worshiper.
It really does. A song speaks to joyfulness, exultation, a lightness of heart. But a psalm, on the other hand, suggests reverence, a certain solemnity, a recognition of God's majesty.
So it's both joy and awe together.
Exactly. And the Sons of Korah, who had this complex and often painful history, they were gifted with this blend. They could use these mournful confessions right alongside exulting praises. It just shows the fullness that's required in true adoration. We need the highs of joy, but they have to be grounded in the reverence of God's, his unapproachable holiness.
And the historical context, which, isn't explicitly named in the text, it provides this dramatic tension that Psalm 48 addresses. The sources suggest it's about the victory during King Jehoshaphat's reign, from 2 Chronicles 20. Could you remind us of the striking details of that event?
Oh, it's a remarkable story of what you could call preemptive divine action. So Jehoshaphat was facing this massive confederacy of kings, Ammon, Moab, and Edom.
Yeah, a huge force.
Huge. These were powerful enemies, and Jehoshaphat's army was just vastly outnumbered. So he did the only thing he really could. He prayed, and he proclaimed a fast. And what follows is just extraordinary. The kings assembled their forces. They were fully ready for battle, but before a single blow was struck, the Lord intervened.
And the source material says they just withdrew without striking a blow. They turned their swords on each other in total confusion.
Total confusion. It was a victory won entirely by panic and divine intervention. The spoils from that victory took days to collect. So this historical backdrop really defines the central message of Psalm 48, that the church's security is not based on its ability to fight, but on the certainty of its divine protector. And Spurgeon organizes it so well, we see this logical progression. Verses 1 to 3, they set the scene honoring the Lord and his city. Then verses 4 to 8 record that miraculous confusion of the foes. Verses 9 to 11 extol Zion's enduring qualities. And then the final verses, 12 and 14, they just affirm Jehovah as the people's God forever. This structure is why the psalm feels so eternally reassuring.
Okay, so let's jump into that foundational claim in what you're calling section 2. The whole psalm, it really rests on this confession of God's greatness. Verse 1, "Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness."
That phrase, "great is the Lord," it has to be seen in direct contrast to all the fleeting manufactured greatness the world offers. Spurgeon, he specifically throws down the gauntlet. He contrasts this declaration with what he calls the mad cry of Ephesus, "Great is Diana."
That contrast is so vital for us today, isn't it? The Ephesian cry was based on, idolatry, superstition, commercial interest. Diana was literally the god of their prosperity.
Right.
The cry was passionate, but it was hollow. Our testimony, great is Jehovah. It's logical, it's demonstrable, and it's self-evident, especially because his greatness is seen in the active deliverance and preservation of his people.
And if his greatness is infinite, then our praise has to correspond to that. The second half of that declaration, greatly to be praised, it speaks directly to the nature of our worship. It has to be constant, laudatory, earnest, and sublime.
Yeah, you can't just offer a quick nod.
You can't. No amount of human effort or, creative capacity can adequately state the honor that's due to a God whose greatness is demonstrated every single time his enemies stumble.
And this applies so clearly to Christ's supremacy within the church. The source points us straight to the Christological application. If there is none truly great in the church but the Lord, then Christ is the fulfillment of this greatness. He is not a shepherd, he's the great shepherd. Not a deliverer, but our great God and Savior. And he's our great high priest.
His greatness is the security of the church. Without a great king, the city falls. With him, his name will be great unto the ends of the earth. But notice where this greatness is primarily revealed.
In the city of our God.
In the city of our God. The church Zion is the favored place of divine manifestation. It's the peculiar abode of the God of Israel.
So, even though God's glory is everywhere, his manifestation is specifically concentrated in the assembly of his people. So if the rest of the world chooses to ignore Jehovah's worship, the chosen people inside, his favored city, have to continue to adore him because his presence and his glorious manifestation are so clearly known right there in their midst.
And this leads directly to the next description. Zion is the mountain of his holiness. This image, it demands two spiritual requirements for the church that we really have to consider in detail.
Elevation and purity.
Exactly. Elevation means conspicuousness. The church is meant to stand out like a mountain rising from the flat plain of the world. It must be a visible testimony.
Right.
But that visibility is meaningless unless it's matched by purity. The mountain has to be of his holiness.
And we are reminded this isn't about physical geography. This is a spiritual requirement.
Yeah.
The church has to partake in the holiness of God to fulfill its purpose. As Spurgeon puts it, only holy people can fittingly praise the Lord. If the church stops striving for sanctification, its praises just become meaningless noise.
Then we move to verse 2, where the image shifts to the spiritual beauty that flows from this holiness. Zion is called beautiful for situation. And while, geographically Jerusalem was striking the Queen of the East, the church's beauty is spiritual. It's defined by its relationship to the Lord.
I really love the way the source material breaks that down, that spiritual placement. It's beautiful because it's situated near God's heart, within the mountain of his power, and this is critical upon the hills of his faithfulness. The church's attractiveness is purely derivative. It shines because it's near the source of light and truth.
The more the church detaches itself from worldly affections and interests, the fairer it becomes. Its beauty is tied directly to its elevation above the world. And this is why the church, despite its earthly size or its temporary struggles, is rightly called the joy of the whole earth.
That phrase, the joy of the whole earth, that can sound almost arrogant to modern ears, can it? Especially when the church is so often criticized or marginalized. But historically and theologically, the claim holds up.
It does. Zion was the world star. Whatever light lingered on earth, concepts of justice, mercy, true knowledge of God, it was all borrowed from the oracles and the truth preserved by Israel and then by the church.
So the church of God, even when it's despised by men, remains the world's true hope.
It does. If God's people were silent, the entire earth would collapse into absolute moral darkness. Zion is the city of the great king, and that means God rules all nations, even those who hate the church, for her ultimate sake and preservation. This security is why we sing.
And verse 3 provides the ultimate comfort and security, which is so key to understanding the rest of the psalm. God is known in her palaces for a refuge. We worship no unknown God. We know him intimately.
This is a vital point for the individual believer and for the collective church. We know him as our refuge. When distress hits, we run to the one we know. And what's more, the source makes a really keen observation here. Even those within the church who are powerful, the kings dwelling in their own earthly palaces, they must not place their confidence there. Our defense is not in our wealth or our influence or our political power, but in the Lord Protector. We have to trust nothing else as our bulwark.
This establishes divine sovereignty and the security of the city before the battle even begins. That groundwork makes the drama that follows so much more intense.
The drama begins with the assembly of the enemies. We shift now to section 3, the sudden defeat and panic of Zion's foes in verses 4 through 7. This is that historical account of Jehoshaphat's victory given eternal application.
It's just a striking picture of how great power, when it's misdirected against the Almighty, it just dissolves instantly. Verse 4 notes, the kings were assembled, they passed by together, they were many, they were powerful, they were confederate, they came in force, coordinating their movements.
But their assembly and their passing were nearly simultaneous. They came, and they vanished. Spurgeon highlights the psychological reversal. It was meant to be this great, boastful gathering with royal leaders preparing to lay siege to the city of God.
Right.
Instead, it became a despairing scattering of terrified fugitive bands. They came like foam on an angry sea, and just like foam, they melted away.
And the critical point is that they didn't even engage in combat. Verse 5 explains the cause of the retreat. They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled and hasted away. They didn't see a greater army. They saw the Lord.
They came, they saw, but they did not conquer. There was no veni vidi vici for them. Before the Lord even came to blows, they fled. And you have to ask, what did they see? They saw evidence of God's presence in the holy city. Maybe it was a celestial sign, or maybe it was just the realization that the people they were attacking were under supernatural protection. Whatever it was, that realization was enough to break their will.
The lesson there is so clear for the church's enemies in any age. If they could truly foresee their inevitable and instant defeat, they would never advance to the attack. When the Lord comes to our help, our strongest, most numerous enemies instantly become nothing more than dust.
And the speed of their retreat is crucial. The troublers were troubled. Their initial haste in assembling was slow compared to their frantic hurry in leaving. Panic seized them, and it seized them right there, right where they hoped to triumph. They fled ignominiously, like children caught in a fright.
This intense dread is then detailed with startling imagery in verse 6. Fear took hold upon them there, and pain, as of a woman in travail. This isn't just mild apprehension. This is paralyzing terror.
This analogy is a powerful expression. You see it in ancient Near Eastern texts to set forth the extremity of anguish and sudden dismay. It communicates two distinct ideas. First, the pain was physically and emotionally overwhelming. It paralyzed their military cohesion. They were seized in what Spurgeon calls giant despair's grip.
And the second idea?
Second, and this is more sobering, the pain is as of a woman in travail. This implies that their dismay is not the end of their suffering. It's only the beginning of an eternal defeat.
That sounds incredibly punitive. How does Spurgeon reconcile that kind of swift, preemptive justice with the loving kindness that the Lord shows his own people?
Well, that's the essential theological synthesis the psalm offers. Spurgeon notes that God's loving kindness to Zion requires this swift, preemptive justice against her foes.
Ah, so they're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. The love of the protector necessitates the defense of the protected. When the Lord arises for the church, the proudest, most powerful foes must be scattered instantly. This act of justice vindicates his moral government, and it maintains the holiness of the mountain. We can't have a secure Zion if its enemies are allowed to prevail.
This dramatic intervention is then illustrated in verse 7. Thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. This shows how easily God overturns the most powerful adversaries who rely on earthly strength.
This image carries tremendous weight, far beyond just maritime warfare. Literally, the strength of some nations lies in their ships, their wooden walls, their long-distance commerce, their global reach.
Yeah.
These are soon broken by the simple breath of the Lord. In contrast, our strength in God fails not. The east wind, which is often destructive and harsh, is used here as God's instrument of judgment.
It also provides a critical theological application about inventions and sort of worldly reliance. Spurgeon suggests that while God is our defense, sometimes he takes vengeance on our own inventions, our earthly ambitions, our man-made systems, so that we look only to him. We must not rely on the wisdom or resources of men, even if they seem advanced or powerful, like those great ships of Tarshish.
And this leads to the third and maybe the most relevant application for the church, the danger of speculative heresies. These false teachings often pretend to bring great wealth or insight from afar, like ships returning from a distant voyage. They are constantly assailing the church with worldly wisdom or sophisticated false doctrines.
They promise new insight, new systems, new ways to achieve salvation or security outside of the covenant.
Precisely. But the breath of the Lord, that east wind, soon drives them to destruction. They are shipwrecked. And the lesson is that human wisdom, when it's relied upon by the church, will soon be found utterly lacking. And yet the church itself remains safe beneath the care of her God and King. The safety is in the King, not in the fleets of human thought.
The profound security that's guaranteed by this swift victory, it leads us right into section the fourth. Eternal assurance, thoughtful praise, and righteous judgment. The victory confirms the promise.
It does. Verse 8 forms a pivotal connection between the past deliverance and future security. It provides a magnificent doctrine of confirmation. As we have heard, so have we seen in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God.
This is the confirmation of faith by experience. The stories we heard from our ancestors, the accounts of creation, the flood, the Exodus, and now this victory of Jehoshaphat, they're reproduced before our very eyes in our own generations. Prophecy and promise are confirmed by present, visible fact.
It connects the theoretical to the tangible. The God of history is the God of our current experience. And the titles used here are incredibly significant. He is first Lord of hosts, a name of sovereignty and absolute power, the commander of the armies that scattered the kings.
Right.
But immediately after, He is called our God, a name of covenant relation and condescension. He is the infinite power who chooses to be intimately ours.
And this fusion of infinite power and intimate ownership, that provides the absolute assurance God will establish it forever. This is a core comfort for the believer. The true church can never be disestablished.
Unlike kingdoms established by earthly kings, which last only for a time, that which God establishes endures to all eternity. Earthly empires rise and fall. Zion stands. This victory is the proof that God's covenant word is reliable and his work is permanent.
This kind of assurance, though, it's not meant to be taken lightly. It has to provoke deep contemplation. And verse 9 shifts the focus inward. We have thought of thy loving kindness, O God, in the midst of thy temple.
Holy people are thoughtful people. They don't just allow God's wonders and mercies to pass before their eyes and then melt into forgetfulness, requiring constant spiritual amnesia. They meditate deeply upon them. They chew over the truth.
And the proper subject for this meditation is defined as God's loving kindness. His is said.
And it covers such a wide range. It's pity to the wretched, pardon to the penitent, help to the prayerful, comfort to the afflicted. It's the faithfulness of God shown to his covenant people regardless of their failings. The practical application here is simple. If we are not actively thinking and meditating on God's mercy, we will quickly forget why we are secure.
And the location matters. In the midst of thy temple, where God is most visibly seen, he is best loved. The assembled saints constitute a living temple. So when we gather together, our musing should focus on the loving kindness of the Lord, which is exhibited in all the varied experiences of living stones that make up the church. Memories of mercy, they sweeten sorrow, and they sober our joys.
This focus on loving kindness leads straight into a declaration of God's universally just fame in verse 10. According to thy name, O God, so is thy praise unto the ends of the earth. God's fame is supreme, unqualified, universal, and everlasting.
It's not confined to the earthly boundaries of Zion. Angels behold it with wonder, and his fame extends even beyond the ends of the earth. The creation itself, the woods, the seas, the mountains, they are full of divine praise, even if men are silent or ignorant of the truth.
And the second part of that verse focuses on his action. Thy right hand is full of righteousness. The hand of the Almighty is never empty. It is full of equity and executive energy.
This really highlights how God deals righteousness fully to everyone. So to the saint, through Christ, he is perfectly just to forgive and justify because the penalty was paid. And to the sinner, he is perfectly just to condemn.
That's right. Neither shall ever find the Lord to be an empty-handed God who cannot enforce his will or vindicate his law. He deals out righteousness to the full measure.
This brings us to what might be the most difficult part of this section. This idea of joy in judgment in verse 11. Let Mount Zion rejoice because of thy judgments. We are commanded to be glad because of the righteous acts of the Lord. Now, for a modern audience, one that's saturated with concepts of mercy and tolerance, why is the execution of justice a legitimate subject for joyful praise?
That's a great question. The primary reason, as the source notes, is vindication. The cities of Judah and the women who suffered most under the threats of these Confederate kings, they are commanded to be the gladdest of the glad now that the spoilers have fled. Their joy is not sadistic. It's the joy of seeing justice done upon oppressors.
Okay, so it's a joy of deliverance and vindication.
Yes, but the broader perspective is one of eternity. We're rejoicing in the fact that God's moral government requires holiness and accountability. Spurgeon actually cites Revelation 19, noting that even the eternal ruin of the wicked will be the theme of adoring song in heaven.
And that perspective is absolutely vital, isn't it? Justice, which might seem severe to our limited human optics when we view it individually, will then be perceived as perfectly consistent with God's loving name. It'll be seen as one of the brightest jewels of his crown, because it proves he upholds the moral order necessary for Zion's survival.
Right, we cannot have a holy God who refuses to execute justice. That execution, therefore, is a source of joy for those who are secure in his covenant.
That profound assurance then transitions into practical instruction for the believer in Section V, inspecting the bulwarks and the eternal guide. The security is there, but we're commanded to verify it and to pass on the knowledge.
The command in verses 12 and 13 is highly tangible. It's almost like a military order. Walk about Zion and go round about her. This calls for a careful, loving, and thorough examination of the church's doctrine, its security, its privileges.
This isn't a hasty jog. It's a leisurely, thoughtful perambulation. We can't too frequently or too deeply consider the origin, the privileges, the security, and the glory of the church. We need to internalize the reality of our protection.
And we are given specific items to inspect, starting with the highest points. Tell the towers thereof. The foes once counted Zion's towers in envy and then in terror. We're commanded to count them with sacred exultation. This is an exercise in doctrinal inventory.
So we need to ask,
Yeah.
are the doctrines, the foundational strength, or the visible beauty of the church crumbling? Are we holding fast to the truths that define our security? We have to know the truth of the Trinity, the truth of substitutionary atonement, the truth of justification by faith alone. These are the defensive towers.
Then the psalmist says, "Mark ye well her bulwarks," or, as the Hebrew suggests, "set your heart to her bulwarks." We have to attentively consider how strong her ramparts are. The Hebrew word that's translated bulwarks, kale, it refers specifically to the ditch or the trench, the low wall or breastwork that surrounds the city.
That's a crucial detail. So it's not just the high visible wall, the towers that protects us. It's the fundamental, often unseen, successive lines of defense. The ditches, the ramparts. That's what provides the true security.
Exactly. We are to pay close attention to the reality that God's protection is layered and comprehensive. The security of God's people is a doctrine that may be safely taught and frequently pondered. We can't neglect inspecting Zion's ramparts simply because some people misuse the truth of eternal security. The final perseverance of the saints is a bulwark, and we have to understand its strength fully.
And finally, we must consider her palaces. These are the fair dwellings in the city. Spiritually, this means we must attentively inspect the royal promises that offer quiet resting places for believers.
So you see how sound the defenses are, and then how fair the resting places are. The security is external, but the peace is internal. And the source material delivers a powerful challenge here, lamenting that many who claim faith are not considerate of the condition of the church.
Yeah, it calls out those who are too busy counting their money and considering their ledgers to know what or where the church's towers are.
Right.
They measure their earthly possessions to the inch, but their heaven hold and grace hold, their assurance in Christ, are often neglected in sheer heedlessness.
And this is the practical core of the song's instruction. If you are a citizen of this ancient secured city, you should be intimately acquainted with your blessed abode. You should know why you are safe and what protections surround you. If you don't know the bulwarks, you can't enjoy the peace of the palaces.
And the purpose of this entire detailed inspection is given immediately in the second half of verse 13, that ye may tell it to the generation following.
This establishes the duty of transmission. We have received the truth, and we have to become students so that we can be teachers. We must repay the debt we owe to the past by handing down the truth to the future, making the next generation aware of the bulwarks of doctrine and the palaces of promise. If we are heedless, the next generation will be unprotected.
This leads us to the final covenant assurance in verse 14. The crowning beauty of the song was just ties everything together. For this God is our God forever and ever. This is the language of proprietary and God-assured and permanent.
We exult in the hope of an eternity of bliss that's secured by covenant. The relationship is world without end. An earthly king can't say of his crown, "This is mine forever and ever," but the Christian can say, "This glorious God with all his divine perfections is my God forever and ever."
And the source makes a really critical point about the word everlasting here. We stand on the truth that for the saints, forever and ever, means exactly what it says, an eternity of secure bliss.
And that proprietary assurance is tied to the promise of perpetual guidance. He will be our guide even unto death. He guides us throughout life to our dying couch, ensuring a safe passage to the end of our mortal existence.
But there is a powerful theological note that's drawn from the Hebrew phrase al-maveth, which some interpret not just as unto death, but as over death or beyond death.
This extends the consolation exponentially. It suggests that he leads us over death to resurrection, overcoming Jordan to Canaan. He leads us to stand triumphant upon the grave of death itself, swallowing up the final enemy in victory.
So it closes the psalm with a triumphant farewell to fear. The consolation is absolute. Since all past foes have been scattered, the kings were assembled, they pass by, and since the bulwarks have defied every attack, all future assaults, including the final enemy of death, will be equally futile.
The security is absolute because the God who established Zion is our God forever.
We have completed a deeply satisfying deep dive into Psalm 48, relying on Spurgeon's exposition to guide us. We started with the sheer overwhelming greatness of God, which is manifested in the church, and saw how that presence induces instant self-defeating panic in his enemies.
And we concluded with the eternal security of this church, which is not a passive blessing we just enjoy, but in active reality we are commanded to study, to inspect, to guard, and to pass on to the next generation. The church is a magnificent fortified city founded on divine promise and protected by divine power.
And here's a provocative thought for you, the learner, to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. We discussed how people who are busy counting their money and considering their ledgers often neglect to examine Zion's spiritual state. The Lord requires us to count the towers, inspect the bulwarks, and consider the palaces of His eternal city with great detail and loving care. So ask yourself, what are your primary account ledgers in life right now, the temporal or the eternal? What practical daily actions does that detailed inspection of doctrine and covenant promise require of you right now to ensure you are not heedlessly taking your eternal security at peradventure? Think about that until our next deep dive.